Hello again. My name is Regina Degnan. I work at the International Students and Scholars Office. My colleague is also here to present our webinar today, and I will let him introduce himself.
Hello, everyone. My name is Mark Mejia. I also work at the International Students and Scholars Office, and thank you all so much for being here. I'm so glad to be joining Regina in this OPT presentation.
Thank you, Mark. And we are both so happy to be here with you and explain the OPT process. ISSO is keenly aware that students face multiple questions in their final semester. There's likely a lot going on right now, which may be a little stressful and busy. Completing your degree is right around the corner, and it's such an accomplishment, representing so much hard work, and we congratulate you. But in other ways, it could feel like you still have some challenges ahead. Your to-do list is too long, and we're here to help. Our goal today is to provide you with answers to the OPT process. We want you to have all the tools, resources, and information you'll need to be successful during the OPT application and while you're in your OPT time period. Let's begin with some important definitions. What exactly is OPT? OPT allows you to remain in the US in F-1 status after you complete your academic program with permission to work in your field of study. I want to emphasize here that any and all employment must be directly related to your degree. OPT is not a general work authorization. For example, if you are receiving your master's in architecture, you'll most likely find a job or internship with an architecture firm. You cannot work for Macy's or drive for Uber unless you are designing the office building they plan to be housed in or drawing plans for an office building renovation. In terms of the application process, it's essentially two important steps. Step one, you submit an application by logging into Compass on our ISSO website with your uni, and we will issue you an updated OPT I-20. After processing it, it will say OPT requested on the second page of your I-20. You will then submit an application to USCIS, which is essentially the US government, and they will then issue you what is called an EAD card. Looking at this picture, imagine your picture in that EAD card on this slide. The EAD card is the end game, the goal of the OPT process. Only when you have the EAD card and you are within the dates printed on that card can you begin your OPT employment. Now, let's take a closer look at the process and the OPT journey we will guide you through step by step. The first person we meet on this trip is John. Who is John, you may ask? That's a good question. He is a USCIS adjudicator, and he is busy, very busy. His office receives 26,000 pieces of mail every day. He is a government worker with no connection to ISSO. And of course, John in this slide is a representative of an adjudicator. He has real life issues, whether it's a caffeine problem or being out sick or on vacation, all of this happening while your application is being reviewed. There's your application in this next slide, as you can see from this visual. There's you, and your application is one of many. Roughly 8 million applications are adjudicated per year by USCIS. Importantly, USCIS begins processing OPT applications in the order they are received. However, there will also be variations in processing times based on your application and the person reviewing your application. That's a lot of applications, and that's a relatively long time. Ultimately, this responsibility is yours to ensure a successful application, but we're here to help ensure that your application in a sea of 8 million applications is approved. Applications are processed in the order they are received, and it takes an average of 90 days and sometimes more. We want you to feel empowered with knowledge about this process. In doing so, it's important to acknowledge what cannot be controlled in the process, how long the process takes, the job market, the government regulations and rules, and how everything is affected by COVID-19. Let's focus on what you can control and a brief overview of our 3 major tips, with the last section devoted to your questions. Tip 1, apply early. Tip 2, choose your start date. Tip 3, use our website. And section 4, answering your questions. Tip 1, apply early. This is a hugely important tip. Based on my experience of years of processing I-20 documents, we know that students who apply early have more options. So I can't emphasize this message enough. What exactly does early mean? The earliest date that USCIS can receive your application for OPT is 90 days before your I-20's program end date. If you are completing your program this semester, like the majority of our audience is, your program end date is the end of the semester for spring 2021. Due to President Bollinger's announcement of a summer semester, the spring 2021 end date for most of our students is 4/30, April 30th. Subtracting 90 days from this date, the earliest you can log into Compass and upload your documents is January 30th. Now, this calendar date has already passed, but don't worry. You can apply this week and you will still be applying on the early side for OPT. Now, this is your choice to apply early. No one at the ISSO can or is going to force you to apply early. What we will do is provide you with information, and I hope persuade you that it's in your best interest to apply early. We know you have many competing things and activities regarding your time with homework, papers, work on campus. However, doing your OPT application now really benefits you. So if it helps, think of it as a mini homework assignment from ISSO. First, some pros and cons on an early application versus a late application. When you apply early, you have time to reapply after a rejection or denial. If you apply late, you may not have time to resubmit if there is a potential problem with your application. If you apply early, you can give your employers a firm start date. You get to use the entire 12 months. If you apply late, you may miss job opportunities and you may not receive authorization for all 12 months of your OPT. In addition, there are some travel implications to applying early or late. And in this case, we have found if you apply early, you don't have to worry about your application status while you are abroad, because your OPT application will have already been approved by USCIS. You can travel without any stress with your EAD card in hand. In contrast, late applications, you will need to find someone to check your mail for any correspondence from USCIS. You may be unable to respond to a USCIS request for further information. You may have a problem returning to the US, and if your application is denied while you're abroad, you cannot re-enter in F-1 status to reapply. Many students have explained to us that they wait to apply because they do not have a job offer. Do you need a job offer to apply for post-OPT? An emphatic no, N-O. You do not need a job offer to apply for post-completion OPT. And even if you have a job offer, USCIS, unfortunately, will not process your application more quickly. They can only process documents in the order they are received. The moral of the story is don't procrastinate. Apply as soon as you are eligible. As the semester progresses, your workload will only become more intense as finals approach. Here we have a nice recap of this section. There are so many benefits to applying early. It's stress-free. The later you apply, the longer you wait, the higher the risk of potential problems. And contrary to what you may have heard from a friend or read on the internet, you do not need a job offer to apply. Apply early. Unfortunately, USCIS is an antiquated bureaucratic system. You saw the slides of the paper process and the truck delivery. So do yourself a favor and complete that mini homework assignment from ISSO. Apply early. I hope I've persuaded you. Now Mark will cover the next important topics of this presentation.
Thank you so much, Regina, and hello, everyone. So here we are at section number 2, tip number 2, choose a start date and stick with it. So it all sort of begins with the OPT start date that you choose. In many ways, this is sort of like the first piece in the puzzle that is your OPT application. You cannot submit an OPT application without a requested start date. You all do have the opportunity to choose your OPT start date within a certain range. This range is 60 days following your program end date. As Regina mentioned, for all of you completing your program this semester and following that updated COVID-19 academic calendar, your program end date is going to be April 30th, 2021. The earliest date you can begin to request OPT is the following day, which is May 1st. The latest you can request to begin OPT is going to be June 29. So again, the 60-day range is going to be from May 1 to June 29. I do want to mention if we have any students out there in a school that is splitting their semester into term A and term B, and if you're only registered in term A, then your program end date will also be at the end of term A. Now, can you change your start date after you send your application to USCIS? Unfortunately, no. Once it has been submitted, there are no changes that can be made. That being said, we know that this may not be an easy decision to make. You know, here we are 90 days before your program even ends. You know, how do you choose? There are quite a few factors to consider when you're choosing your OPT start date. If you have a job offer, that decision is pretty easy. If not, you may want to consider travel plans. You also want to consider how much time you want to allow yourself to look for jobs after completing your program without accumulating unemployment time. And to help with this decision, we'll be playing a short video that highlights really all of the factors that you want to consider when choosing your OPT start date. The video will have 2 alums. They're talking about how they chose their OPT start date. One is going to be a spring graduate, the other is a fall graduate. Let's go ahead and take a look.
Hello! Thanks for joining us today at Ask the Alums. As an international student at Columbia, I know I'm not alone in feeling very stressed about applying for post-completion OPT, especially choosing the start date. I know I can choose a start date from any of the 60 days after my I-20 program end date, but it's so hard to know what's the right one to pick. If you have a job offer, it's easy. Your requested start date would be the day your employment begins, but for the rest of us, it's not so simple. It can take an average of 3 months for USCIS to process OPT applications, so we can't really wait until the last minute to make a decision. I've asked 2 alums who are now employed on OPT to give us some guidance. Tell us how you chose your OPT start date.
Sure, so I was a May graduate, so I had to choose a start date between the middle of May and the middle of July. I didn't have an offer at the time of applying for OPT, and I was still looking for a job. I knew I didn't want to choose an early start date right after graduation because I was worried that the 90-day clock for unemployment would begin before I started work.
What do you mean by the 90-day clock?
Well, OPT regulations allow you to accrue a total of 90 days without employment throughout the entire period of your authorized OPT time. Days of unemployment start counting from the start date on your EAD card.
Exactly right. So my first thought was to choose the latest possible start date in July to be on the safe side and to maximize the time I might need to find a job.
Huh, that sounds like a good plan.
I thought so too. I thought I could change my OPT start date if I found a job that started earlier, but when I checked with the ISSO, I learned that you can't change your OPT dates while your application is being processed.
Bummer, that really locks you in.
Yeah, not only that, I had to travel abroad in late June. Now, obviously you can't start a job and then immediately ask for time off, and I didn't want my time abroad to use up part of the 90 days of unemployment. Luckily, my F-1 visa was still unexpired, so I didn't need to go to an embassy or consulate to apply for a new one while I was abroad.
So what day did you end up choosing?
I finally chose the latest start date in July because of my travel plans and to allow more time for my job hunt.
Awesome! How about you? How did you choose your start date?
Of course, a lot of same factors apply to anyone applying for OPT, but my situation was a bit different because I finished my program at the end of the fall term, not in May. The program end date for December graduates is the last day of the fall term, not the date in February when they get their degrees. So my 60-day window for choosing an OPT start date began right before the winter holidays. Completing a program in December is a bit challenging because not many employers are going to hire anyone to start during the holidays. If I chose a very early start date, I probably start using up some of the 90 days of unemployment, so I didn't want to do that. Since it can take an average of 3 months or more for USCIS to process OPT applications, and there's no way to speed up a pending application, I knew it was important to apply for OPT as early as possible.
So how early can we apply for OPT?
Oh, I know. The earliest you can apply is 90 days before your program end date.
Exactly. So I began my application in September even though I didn't have a firm offer of employment yet.
So how did you make your choice?
I was afraid that if I chose a late start date, I might miss out on an opportunity. If an employer wanted someone to begin earlier, I decided to choose a date somewhere in the middle of the 60 days. Before you start working, weekend days count toward the 90 days limit without employment. So I chose a Monday as my OPT start date, and I recommend you do the same. I'm happy to report it all worked out.
Fantastic! Thank you both for sharing your experience. To summarize for our viewers, when you're choosing a post-completion OPT start date, you need to consider these factors: the time you need to find a job and the time it takes to get the EAD card in the mail, that you can't change your OPT dates nor can you expedite the processing time, the 90-day limit for unemployment, and any international travel plans. And remember, visit issso.columbia.edu for detailed information on the OPT application process. Thanks again, everyone.
Great. So as we all saw, there's really no one right answer. It very much is a personal and individual choice. As an advisor, I can let you all know that I've seen students request the earliest possible start date. I've seen the latest, and really every day in between. So to recap this section, your OPT start date is where the process begins. There are a lot of factors to consider, but keep in mind, once chosen and submitted, you cannot change this start date. And here we are at the final section, section 3, use the ISSO website and trust it. Here we have Lisa. She is in your history class and an F-1 student from Canada. She tells you that you don't need a valid F-1 visa when you travel on OPT. The only document you'll need is an EAD card. Now, should you trust her? Unfortunately, no. Sorry, Lisa. I'm sure you're a great friend, but the ISSO is the place to go for really anything and everything related to your immigration record. Not only is the ISSO website reliable, it's also always up to date. It is available 24/7, and you can access it from your computer or also from any of your smartphones. We do have an amazing communications team that ensures it is very user-friendly, and we maintain the website with really the best possible content for you as international students. And on that topic, there has been a new addition to our website, the ISSO 2021 Updates and Resources page. Really with so much that has happened since COVID-19 and continues to happen, we wanted to have one place for you as our international students and our international scholars to go for answers to frequently asked questions, to see the latest updates and policies, sort of have one place for resources related to COVID-19, visas, and travel. That being said, returning to OPT, everything you need to know about OPT is on our website. Specifically, the nitty-gritty details about the application process, relevant links to the documents you'll need, the types of employment allowed, and specific mailing instructions. What we'll do now is play another short video just to sort of help orient you with the OPT website and also talk about traveling on OPT.
Hello, and welcome to the ISSO website. The purpose of this short video is to go on a brief tour of the website specific to post-completion OPT. We'd like to show you how easy it is to use and highlight some important topics. To begin, we will scroll over the header Employment, and under For Students, we will click on F1 OPT after your program. As with all our web pages, you will see details relevant to each page and topic. As we continue to scroll down, we'll see quick links indicating what is covered on the page, such as eligibility, important information to know before you apply, and an application process overview. As long as you carefully follow our ISSO instructions, there should be no issues with your OPT application. Here, you can see our OPT calculator, which you can use to figure out the range of dates you can choose from for your start and end date of OPT. We would now like to highlight another important topic, travel during OPT. Information on this topic can be found by hovering over our Visas and Travel tab. Under For Students, we'll select Travel during F1 OPT. It is important to know if you are traveling and plan to return before the program end date on your I-20, since your re-entry will be based on your return as a continuing student. In this scenario, your OPT application has no impact on travel regardless of whether it's pending or approved, since you're currently enrolled and will return to the US before the end of the semester. With the pending OPT application after your I-20 program end date is passed, we recommend that you remain in the US until your OPT application is approved. This is because if you're abroad and your OPT application is rejected or denied, you will no longer be eligible to enter F-1 status to apply again for post-completion OPT. That being said, there are certain circumstances where an F-1 student may want or need to travel with the pending OPT application after their I-20 program ended. If this is your situation, please see the documents here. These are the documents that we recommend you have with you when you request entry back into the US. We also recommend flying to JFK or Newark, as we have interacted with those CBP, Customs and Border Protection officers. Finally, with an approved OPT application and your EAD in hand, traveling as an F-1 student is far less complicated. Below, you will be able to see the documents that you require as you are still in F-1 status while on OPT after graduation. Thank you!
Great. So as you can see, our goal here is really just to ensure that you always have access to the information you need. And to recap this section, trust the ISSO website when it comes to your OPT application. I know this application can potentially seem scary, but as long as you carefully follow our instructions, there really should be no issues with your OPT application. Now, here we are at actually a pretty important slide. What are the updates that are unique to spring 2021? Sort of addressing what we need to be extra mindful of during these times of COVID-19 and remote learning. The first thing I want to address is returning to the US in order to apply. So per the OPT instructions, specifically the I-765, a form that you'll be completing, you are required to be physically in the US at the time of mailing an OPT application to USCIS. This relates to COVID-19 because some of you may currently be abroad. I believe there may be 5% of you that are abroad. Unfortunately, you will need to return to the US and send your application from within the US as well. Secondly, just a quick FYI about mailing your application. Before January 8 of this year, applications to USCIS were sent to one of two addresses, depending on the mailing address that you provided to USCIS. However, now things are a little more simple. The delivery address for OPT applications to USCIS is the same for all applicants. This is the USCIS Chicago lockbox, and our OPT webpage, of course, has been updated. Thirdly, I do want to prepare you all for the amount of time you may have to wait before your application is receipted by USCIS. So historically, after students send their application, their checks are cashed and they receive notifications from USCIS that their application is received, usually within 30 days. However, now, because of things related to COVID, this sort of receipting of your application, so the cashing of your check, the receiving of a receipt notice in the mail, we're seeing this take a lot longer. Actually, we're seeing sometimes for most applicants, this is taking 8 weeks or maybe even more. Thankfully, USCIS has publicly acknowledged this issue. They do claim to be working on it. I'm sure that they are. Things are not easy for them as well, for adjudicators like John. Thankfully, you are all able to remain in the US for as long as it takes USCIS to adjudicate your request. Okay, you may have heard of something called a grace period. When you are on OPT, your 60-day grace period is actually moved to the end of your OPT authorization. So that 60-day grace period does not apply to you as OPT applicants waiting for your application to be approved. I will also note here, please do ensure that you keep confirmation of FedEx or UPS delivery. There are certain OPT deadlines that you'll read about when you go to our webpage. Thankfully, these deadlines are linked to when your OPT application was received. Okay, it's not linked to the date that you receive your receipt notice. And finally, on this topic, I do want to note that the ISSO is pursuing action to advocate for all of our students and all really F-1 students to sort of help fix this issue as fast as we can. And the fourth thing here I want to talk to you all about is reporting and 90 days of unemployment on OPT. As we all saw in the video, you are allotted 90 days of unemployment for the entire duration of your OPT period. This is just an important reminder to report your employment once you start working. This is very important because when you report your employment to the ISSO, not only do we update our records, but we will update your F-1 CVIS record as well. So basically our records here at the ISSO and the US government. If you are working, but you don't report, then our records are not updated, the US government's records are not updated, and they could actually potentially close your F-1 record, even though you're working, because they don't know that you're working. So again, just it's very important to be sure that you are reporting employment. So here we are back to John from USCIS. Don't get lost in a sea of applications. Remember that your application is one of many. That being said, we know how important this is to you. We know how hard you've worked to get to this point. I want to let you know that your F-1 CVIS record remains active with Columbia during OPT. So you are all still in F-1 status because OPT is not a new visa. It's basically an extension of your F-1 status, and it is an optional benefit to F-1 students. So we at the ISSO are still 100% here for you, not just during the application process, but during your entire time on OPT. During COVID-19, even though our physical offices are closed, we're also working remotely. If you have any questions at all, you can always email us. If you want to talk to us, send us an email with a request, and we can set up a phone appointment that way as well, phone or Zoom. And so again, here are the things that you can control when it comes to your OPT application. 1, apply early. 2, choose your start date and stick with it. 3, ensure you are using the ISSO website. Ultimately, I do hope that this presentation eased some of the anxiety surrounding the OPT process. And thank you all again so much for being here. Congratulations, you've reached your final term, and best of luck to you all this final term. Regina and I are here to answer some questions. We're going to answer as many questions as we can. If we don't have a time for your questions, please again note you can email the ISSO, especially if your question is more case specific, emailing might be the best route.
Great, thank you so much, Mark. So this is the first question we have from students in our audience today. Can you please discuss what happens when a student loses their EAD card while they traveled abroad? So we would ask that you contact ISSO at columbia.edu because you would have the option of applying for a replacement EAD card, and we could guide you through that process. However, we would want to know exactly where you are in your OPT time period to provide you with the correct advice regarding this inquiry, because a replacement EAD card, for it to be issued, would also take approximately 3 months. So this is a great question. It is case specific. It's also a good reminder to you all, because the EAD card is so important. When you receive it in the mail, please make a digital record of it. Please take a picture of the front and back of your EAD card, because that may help you in the future. You do need the actual physical card, for your employer. But if something happens like a lost EAD card, that just might be a benefit to you to have a digital copy of your EAD card, the front and the back. This is a good question. If a person in our audience has lost their EAD card, please email ISSO and we'll assist you and learn a little bit more about where you actually are in your OPT. Thank you.
Here we have the next question. Is it possible to make the OPT application from abroad? That is a really good question, especially all things considered with COVID-19 and remote learning. Unfortunately, there have been no official changes to the I-765 that reflect the ability to apply from outside the US.
Okay. Our next question is, the ISSO website mentioned that my passport should be valid for at least 6 months when I apply for OPT. I wanted to know if I may apply for OPT while my passport is being renewed at the Indian Embassy. So this is your decision. We have had students in this situation. You have 2 choices. You can contact the Indian Embassy in Washington, D.C., or the consulate here in New York and explain the urgency of the situation and see if they are able to issue you a new passport, and then submit your OPT application after receiving your new passport, which would then be valid out into the future for 6 months. In the alternative, some of our students, because they are concerned about the processing times at USCIS, have chosen to submit the name page of a passport that is valid less than 6 months. But we recommend and highly recommend, because we don't want you to get a request for further evidence, that you also submit proof, a kind of receipt or email or whatever they provide you with at, in this case, the Indian embassy, to show that you have submitted for a renewal. We do not know, because each USCIS adjudicator is individual, whether or not they would give you an RFE if your passport is about to expire. So this would be your decision. If at all possible, I would recommend that you provide an updated passport. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure when it comes to not wanting to get an RFE that can delay your application. But we have had students submit successfully with a receipt notice from a US embassy or consulate indicating that they are applying for a new passport. So that's a very good question, and thank you.
Great. Thanks, Regina. The next question is, what happens if your employer changes over the course of your OPT? This is also a really great question. So the nice thing about OPT is that the regulations are pretty open in regards to what you can do. So as long as you are working cumulatively for more than 20 hours a week, and as Regina mentioned, the work is related to your program of study, really, you are allowed to do a lot of things. You can definitely work for multiple employers. The employment can be paid, the employment can be unpaid. You're allowed to freelance. So all these things are possible. And if your employer changes over the course of your OPT, like I sort of mentioned earlier about reporting, what you want to make sure that you're doing is reporting any changes to the ISSO so that we can update our records and your U.S. government F-1 CVIS record as well.
Okay, our next question is, are we allowed to take up a short unpaid internship for a month or so once our EAD card start date has begun? And the answer is yes. During OPT, during that 1 year of authorization, the work can be paid or unpaid so long as it relates to your major. And the follow-up to that same question is, also, can we then change employers once we have something more concrete? And the answer again is yes. You would log into OPT reports on our website and you would update it with your new employer and address. And I think that's a great way to manage your year of OPT so you do not accumulate too many days of unemployment. That's a real take charge attitude. And often Mark and I and our fellow advisors are urging students to maybe consider an unpaid internship so you do not accrue too many days of unemployment, because the maximum is 90.
The next question we have is, if I leave the US after having applied for OPT and return before my program end date, will there be any issues? The answer to that question is, if you are returning before your program end date, there really shouldn't be any issues regardless of what your OPT application status is. This is because if we think about any time you're entering the US, you're sort of going to want to conceptualize and think for yourself, what is the reason I'm entering? Do I have a reason? And whether or not you've applied for OPT, if you're entering before your program end date, you are able to enter because you haven't completed your program yet. And so that ties into the second part of this question is, which is, if my OPT application is denied, will I not be able to return to the US under my new OPT? So if your application is denied before your program ends, you can still re-enter, right? Because your program hasn't finished. You're an F-1 student, you're allowed to enter to finish your degree. However, if your OPT is denied and it is after your program end date, there's no academic reasoning for you to re-enter, and that OPT application is denied. So in that case, you are not able to re-enter to submit a new application. This is why if you send an application to USCIS and it is after your program end date, we highly recommend that you remain in the US for that specific reason. Of course, as we saw in the video, there's, especially considering COVID-19, we're all in, very different circumstances. So it is possible to leave, but you do run that risk of being denied after your program end date. You just will not be able to re-enter to reapply.
Okay, the next question we have is, why would USCIS reject an OPT application? So our students have a very high approval rating. Most of our OPT applications are approved. Errors that I've seen have been the following. A student forgets to sign the I-765 form or does not sign in ink. You have to sign in ink. They require that. Or a student forgets to mark the box on the first page and indicate exactly what they are in fact applying for. So those are reasons for rejections that we have seen. If you apply early, then when USCIS sends this application back, the entire application back to you, we will help you reapply. And that's why we want you to apply early, so we have time, sufficient time, to help you with your reapplication. There have also been troubles with bounce checks. Bounce checks will be a reason for refusal. So please make sure that you have enough funds in your account, which can also be a little bit difficult as you're winding up the semester. So those are just 3 reasons that we've seen. Of course, we hope your application is successful, and we have videos and step-by-step instructions so you don't make those mistakes. Thank you.
The next question we have is, do we need OPT to work remotely for a company in our home country while physically staying in the US? That is a good question. And especially considering, how long USCIS may take, you may think about working for a company from your home country while in the US. Unfortunately, the ISSO advises all students, when you are physically staying in the US, to not work for any employers or engage in any work that is not related to your F-1 status. So this would include working for an international organization like one in your home country while you're in the US in F-1 status. Really, when you are in the US in F-1 status, because it is a student visa, you're going to be studying, and then you're only going to be engaging in work that is approved through your F-1 status, which would be OPT.
Okay, I think that is our last question. Terrific. Well, again, thank you all. Thanks, Mark, for helping me answer these questions. We're a team up here, and thank you again to the team behind the scenes. Mostly thank you, our students, for tuning into this webinar. It's really a pleasure to be here with you and explain the OPT process. Best of luck in the rest of the semester.
Take care, everyone. Stay safe.